Well, hello, it's Mathew Blades. Welcome to today's podcast with Jennifer Fink about building strong boys. You may be here because, well, number one, you're a fan of the podcast. And first, thank you so very much. And number two, you've got boys yourself and you've got questions about building strong boys. What does that look like in 2023? So on this podcast today, we're going to have a really interesting conversation about how to handle teenage drinking. We're going to talk about what age seems to be the toughest for teenage boys. And one of my favorite parts of today's podcast is a discussion surrounding, is there a difference between being a good human, a good man, and a good woman? Like, what do those things mean? Do they mean different things? So I'm delighted that you're along for the ride, and we're going to get to the podcast in just a couple of moments. I do want to say thank you so very much to Dr. Todd Hurst. His new practice, Health Span MD, has been a sponsor of this podcast for the last couple of months, and his office is now open. He's seeing patients, and his approach is so awesome. It's so holistic. There's a team of coaches. It's not just a cardiologist, and they are looking out for everything. I cannot say enough good things about Dr. Todd Hurst and Health Span MD. If you're somebody who's even an ounce concerned about your heart health, he is definitely your guy. He's in Central Phoenix here, and he'll just take such good care of you. Cannot say enough good things about Dr. Todd Hurst and Health Span MD. Go to healthspanmd.com. You answer a couple of questions, see if you're a fit, and you can get that ticker feeling better. Okay, let's jump into today's podcast right after a couple of messages.
Hey, what's up? It's me, Chris Powell. And before we start the podcast, I got a question for you. Do you want to start a healthy habit? Do you want to feel great for the rest of the day? And do you want to do all of that in less than 3 minutes? I'm on a mission to move 1 million people every single day with my nonprofit and app called Move 1 Million. It's fast, easy, fun, and you'll feel great for the rest of the day. Oh, and the best part? It's 100% free. You can find us at m1m.org or search M1M on the Google Play Store or on the App Store.
And he looks right at me and he says, Mathew, you are a transitional character in your lineage. And that is why I do what I do. Hi there, my name is Mathew Blades, podcast host and motivational speaker, and I love keynoting and putting on workshops to help people understand the value of self-care. Because there are people in this room that feel broken, but you're not. There is nothing wrong with you. Just like there was nothing wrong with me. I just needed to step into my life's purpose more, and that's what I want to encourage you to do. Let's do this together. Head on over to learnfrompeoplewholiveit.com. Now, let's get to today's podcast.
Find Learn from People Who Lived It wherever you get podcasts. Search it using all one word. Learn from People Who Lived It.
Welcome to another episode of Learn from People Who Lived It.
Well, hello, and welcome to another episode of Learn from People Who Lived It. We are in for such a treat today. Jennifer Fink is going to join us. We met, how long has it go, or how long ago has it been now? Maybe 6-7 months?
No, I think it was last March.
Oh, wow. A year.
Yeah. It was a year, and it was a lot nicer weather in Arizona than it is here in Wisconsin in April.
At any rate, we met at a conference, and then I was on her podcast, which she has, and then now she's written a book, and it's like, we got to reconnect. We have so much to talk about. You've got your new book, which is out, called Building Boys, Raising Great Guys in a World That Misunderstands Males. And one of the things that you say that you and I connect on so fiercely is we all have this idea that we want to raise great little human beings. Most parents would say, like, if I said, what's your goal? They would probably say some version of, I want to raise the kind of kids who can do something in the world. But like you then say right after that is this idea that most of us just aren't super sure how to get there. And that's what's tricky, right? And you joke about it a lot when you have kids. You say there's no manual for this stuff.
Right.
And how old are your boys right now?
So my youngest is now 17, and they go up from there, 17, 20, 22, and 25.
Okay, so mine are 16 and 14. So between the two of us, we've got this thing at least up to a quarter century, right?
Right, absolutely. Yeah. And those are really some critical years. I mean, 14, I got to tell you, 14-year-old boys, generally speaking, are not my favorite humans. And I love boys, but I found that 14, 15-year-old age range parenting them to be really challenging.
You and I both, and it's really probably around this idea that I was just talking to one of my friends about last night, which is that is exactly the age where they start needing you very differently. Yes. And then, with all of the physical and hormonal changes that are taking place too, and if they're not great communicators of their feelings, they get even quieter. And it turns into this age, and other moms and dads will relate to this, where all you get is grunts and noises out of your boys.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it feels like you're tiptoeing through a minefield a lot of the time, and you don't know where they're hidden. You're not sure which look of yours or which sentence will set it off. It's a little stressful.
Yeah, isn't it wild? But then I'll tell you that we're starting. So then my other one is soon to be 17, and I'm starting to notice a little bit of a softening now. Like some of that stuff is starting to go away, and we're back to, okay, I need my mom and dad for a few things during this whole time. And did you find that to be your experience in your high school years?
I am nodding my head vigorously over here. And I think that is such an important message for other parents, because especially if it's your first go around, right? And you've got a kid at this 14, 15 stage, and they can start sooner. And how am I going to do this? This is terrible. I don't even know if I like this kid. This kid surely does not like me anymore. It gets better. And in my experience talking to other parents, it often is sort of around 17-ish, that last maybe senior year of high school. And it gets better from there on out. So hang in there. All of that work that you put in that front end, those front years, it's still there. And that little boy, he's still in there. He's just got some stuff to work through.
In a big way.
Yeah.
In a big way. And with less tools than you and I have as adults.
I had to remind myself of that so often. I would get frustrated, and I'm like, how can I expect him to be dealing with this better at 14, 15, 16? I didn't learn these things until I was in my 30s. So
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so true, and I get, one of the things I get to do now that I love so much is coach young athletes, and especially kids in high school. And when I'm dealing with them or a situation or their parents or, some difficulty has arisen, I kind of remind people all the time, this is exactly the age where they're supposed to be doing all this stuff. Okay. This is when all of the, can I go here? Can I do this? Can I try that? That's when all of this is supposed to be happening. And one of the greatest bits of advice that I ever was given as a parent was try to approach situations more like a referee. And which means be a little less emotional about it. If they break the rules and they commit a foul, they get put in the penalty box. End of discussion. You don't have to be super emotional about it. But it's tough because, and I want your thoughts on this, because what can usually happen is when they do things that we don't agree with, it kind of triggers something in us in a way where we don't have the best reactions.
Yes. I think some of it is, you said it at the beginning, right? We come into parenting and we want to raise decent humans. I mean, I don't know anybody who becomes a parent and your goal is to create a terrible person.
That's right.
We do what we can, and we're trying to do a good job. And then we kind of think, or fool ourselves into thinking, that if I do a good job, this is going to be a decent kid, however I define that. And so when our kids do, quote unquote, bad things, which could be not turning in homework or getting in trouble with the law or skipping out of school or trying substances, we think that reflects on us, or that we haven't done a good job, and we leap to conclusions that this means that this is going to be a terrible person. And none of those things are really true, but that's what gets triggered in our minds.
Isn't it so important to say, for people that are in the thick of it right now, almost every stage is temporary?
The thing that I find myself reminding myself frequently and other parents now, especially because my boys are older. They're teenagers, they're young adults.
Right.
And, a lot of us have ideas about how we would like our boys to behave respectfully at those ages. Almost none of them are going to do that 100% of the time. Let's be real. Think about it, though. How many good men do you know right now? Good men who are in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, beyond, who, if you looked at certain points in their past, you wouldn't have necessarily pointed and said, that's a good man right there. People grow, people change. And I don't think that it's healthy for any of us to jump to these broad conclusions based on what somebody does when they're 16 or 21. People can change. And boys especially, and I think you've seen this a lot as a man yourself, there's a lot of growth that continues to happen while well into your 20s.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. 28 years old is the fully developed male brain, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah. My husband will tell you 60.
That's perfect, right? Now, have you and your husband been together throughout most of the raising of your boys?
No. He kind of came in about halfway through. So the boys' dad and I divorced when our oldest was 11. Well, separated and then divorced when the oldest was 11 and the youngest was 3.
Okay.
And it was a couple years after that I got together with my now husband, who had previously also been married. And we chose to continue to living in separate households, partly because there was enough going on. And he had also raised children and he had also gone through a divorce. And we don't need to introduce all kinds of extra complexity in here.
Uh-huh. So you guys you kept raising your kids independently while being a couple.
His youngest was 2 years older than my oldest. So he was almost done raising his kids.
Got it.
And I still had kids in the house and, their dad is very involved in their lives. So, he continued raising his, I continued raising mine. He was involved in their lives, but he was involved as a friendly presence, and he didn't try and take on the dad father figure because he knew the boys had a dad.
Okay. So back to this business of raising boys. It occurred to me that, the last 10 minutes as we've been talking, one of the things we haven't done yet is define a good boy. You know what I mean? What does it mean these days to be a good human? And so give me your perspective on that. What does it mean to be a good human in the way you see it?
This is the biggest question. And one question I've been wrestling with lately, and I'd be curious to hear your answer to this, is there a difference between good human and good man, good woman? I'm not sure.
I don't know that there is. Yeah.
Right? For me, I'm talking about good human, decent human, people who treat others with respect, with dignity, who listen to and consider other viewpoints, who demonstrate care and compassion and receive care and compassion. And for me, interdependent, I think, is a big part of it. I think we as humans need to work on building our interdependency skills. So I have my talents and strengths and others have theirs. How can we work together? How can we build up each other and work more efficiently as teams instead of everybody doing everything alone? Sure.
Yeah. And I think, I know the conversation right now as we're starting to poke more holes at gender and stereotypes and some of the things that are happening in society and culture right now, they do kind of lead us back to that road of saying, well, skip the man or the woman part and just get to being a good person. So what does a good person look like? And I like everything that you articulated there. I think if my response to that question would be similar. Mm-hmm. Kind hearts, competitive in a way where you want to make yourself better. I like the idea of being a strong, silent type. That's just something I admire. But then as soon as I say that, I also think there's value in those people that just can't shut up sometimes. They say some brilliant things too.
We need all of us, right?
We need everybody, right? Yeah. But I like, it's this idea of maybe it's, what does it mean to be a good human? To be a little less idealistic, to be a little less caught up in your version of everything and understand that there's a lot of other viewpoints that have a place at the table too. And here's the big thing, like, do you want peace or do you want to be right? It's that, so let go of everything that you think needs to be a certain way and just more or less go with it and look around and go, okay, I guess this is what we're doing now.
So it's openness and acceptance and a willingness to try and exist in other ways and other circumstances. Yeah. And really too, that what's coming through me right now is just also this idea of, if we're going to, well, because men and women both struggle with it, but letting go of anger as such a motivating factor for so many things, right? We see it in discipline. We see it in sports, right? Yeah. Where coaches are just angry and screaming all the time. And it's like, well, maybe that's the way we used to do it, but I don't know that that's the way we need to do it anymore. And so if you don't mind, Jennifer, let's have a conversation about anger. Yeah. Both personally and then kind of what you're seeing and what you may have scripted about in the book, but we're having to kind of adjust our attitudes around anger now, too, which is probably good. Give me how you used to do it, how you do it now. One of the things that I learned in the course of my life, and this is one of the things where, I was probably in my 30s when I started putting this together. Okay. For me, a lot of things show up as anger. And it turns out that anger and rage and irritability were symptoms of depression that I did not know about. And as I dug further back, I think a lot of this is, I grew up in a family that didn't really do emotions. Like, that wasn't a thing. And so you stuff stuff. You learn you can't talk about these things. You just hold on to it. And so you get quietly resentful until it explodes in anger. And that was not a very healthy way to live. I mean, it wasn't great for my relationships. It was not great for my parenting. Me blowing up at my kids, especially when I'm mad at them for not controlling themselves, is a very messed up dynamic. But that was what was my natural inclination at first. And so for me, it's been a process of learning how to identify and look at some of the underneath emotions. I think a lot of times, not for everybody and not all the time, but a lot of times for me, there's a fear buried under anger. And I think that's true for a lot of parents, especially when our kids are doing things that make us angry. We're actually afraid of something. Yeah, we're afraid of the way they're going to turn out. We're afraid of what's going to happen next and all the things. Like, we want to control every aspect of them, which is pretty sweet and admirable, but impossible. Ultimately, we can't. It's impossible, right? It's impossible. And there are really appropriate times for anger, right? If somebody's about to be in an unsafe position, for example, like, this is a perfect time to get a little animated and get a little bit excited. I know you and I have connected around the idea of inner child work, just to kind of in the past. And one of the things that I love to talk about with other parents right now is inner child wounds. And, there's according to psychologists, psychiatrists, behavioral specialists, there's a few ways that we can ding our kids pretty good. We can not allow them to have their own thoughts and opinions. We can kill the fun at every turn, and we can shame and tease them. Okay, so if we do those three things to our kids, there's a pretty good chance that we throw some wounds on them that they're going to have to figure out later in life too. And when I'll say me, so sometimes my kids will do things in my home that I used to get in a ton of trouble for as a kid. And I'm trying to make that separation of like, okay, is it that big of a deal? Or am I just getting upset because that's how it was done to me? And then, I remember being a kid saying, I'm never going to do that to my kids.
So that little
But
voice
it's
comes on
right
in my
there,
head.
waiting for the instant, and you just like act. For me, one of those things, it's not a specific thing. It's more like an attitude and a tone.
Yes.
It's like it triggers, my brain starts screaming, disrespect, disrespect.
Right,
And like,
right.
this is the worst possible thing. And so I need to jump on you for this. And it's not necessarily that the kid has done anything disrespectful or terrible. Sometimes they are just trying to share their opinion. Right. Or sometimes it can be as simple as, this is one that for a lot of parents, moms especially, can scream disrespect. You ask the kid to clean up their room, take out their garbage, put their laundry in, and they haven't done it yet.
Yeah.
And it screams disrespect in your head.
Right. Go, girl. Get it.
But it could really be that this just isn't their topmost priority, and they really did just lose track of time, and it has nothing to do with how they feel about me as a person. And I've learned I have to separate my reaction from what may actually be going on.
Isn't that so true? Yes, it's such a great thing for you to say right there, because it's just, that in itself is like one of the golden nuggets that we could give all incoming parents. That idea of separation from the event. A little bit.
Yeah.
It's so good to know everybody goes through this, right? It's so good to know we all go through this. Let's talk about a couple of specific things. You want to?
Yeah.
Let's talk about, okay, you got boys, and the first time a little alcohol shows up on the scene. The first time, I hear the sigh in your voice, right? And it might not even be your kid drinking, but it's somebody in his circle, whether it's him or not, is starting to go down that road. We've had a couple instances at our home. We do not believe, sincerely don't believe that it's our son who's drinking, but he does have a few friends that he's admitted to us are. So give me the Jennifer Fink recipe for handling that situation the first time it shows up.
I don't know.
And have you gone through it?
I don't know that there is a recipe. I mean, as soon as you said that, there was this time with one of my boys who was in high school at the time, which is very completely 100% typical. Right. I had actually gone into his room to talk to him, which was not something I did often because their rooms were very much like, it's your room, and it was nasty in their rooms. I didn't want to spend time in there. But I went into his room and I was sitting there and I was talking to him, and I look over. Is that a beer can under your desk? Huh, yes. Oh, a beer can that's open and still has beer in it. And, had to deal with that. And it was, we tried that and didn't like it. And so what do you do? I mean, I talked about it. I didn't ignore it. I brought it up. Took advantage to once again share my values, which I don't approve of underage drinking. I don't want you to do this. Here's why. All those things. And you can probably hear it in my voice, even as I'm saying this. I still remember being a teenager. I can say all of these things, which every parent always says, and kids are still going to do stuff.
Yeah.
Where I tried to land with things was, I want you to know where I stand. I want you to know the safety concerns. I'm not going to shame you or just come down hard on you for doing what most of us have also done. And because if something goes bad, I want to know about it. I want a chance to help. And I don't want you to feel like you have to hide it or run away.
God, such a refreshing answer. Such a refreshing answer.
What'd you do?
Exactly the same thing. I mean, I'm not even joking, right? It was such a wild event because there was like the 4th of July, and they had planned on going to a parking lot to light off some fireworks and have a couple of drinks, I guess. And my wife comes to me. She's like, I just have a feeling. And I was like, well, what is your feeling? And so sure enough, she went and she looked in the trunk, and there was a couple of bottles of booze. And my son and his friends were all here. They were hanging out because we were going to eat a barbecue together, and then they were going to take off. And I called all of them in the kitchen and had the liquor displayed right there on the island. And they knew from the moment they walked in the room what was what we figured out, and we proceeded to keep the kids over. We told them the sleepover was null and void, but we fed them. We had a nice dinner with them. We talked a little bit about why they might want to drink. We talked a lot about what you just said, safety concerns. I definitely pushed on them my values on it. And then we have a little different conversation in our family because we have so many alcoholics in my lineage. And so the conversation that I have with my sons is a little bit more about addiction than like don't drink and don't do this. Like the messaging that I give both my boys is like, hey, listen, I'm not telling you not to drink. I'm just telling you that it's very possible it could be a super slippery slope for you. And I need you to be aware of that so you manage it. And I think that's actually been a more effective way of approaching it rather than don't drink.
So I find that really interesting because that is an issue for sure on my side of the family. Mm-hmm. It is an acknowledged issue on my side of the family.
Yeah.
It is also an issue on the other side of the family, but it is not acknowledged. So it's a difficult conversation to have because, yes, you are susceptible for these reasons. And here are some examples in this family. And then everybody over here is like, but that's 100% normal. So I also live in the state of Wisconsin, which is a very, very difficult state to live in and to try and, moderate drinking really isn't a thing here. It's right.
All in.
It's all in. It is a very unhealthy culture as far as drinking, but it is so normal that what you grow up thinking of as moderation is not.
Yeah, listen, Wisconsin is beer country.
Yes.
It Pabst, and they're all down there.
Yes. So it's challenging. And that brings up the whole issue of, we are parenting our kids within a culture as well. So whatever your values are in your home, absolutely share those with your kids. Share your family history. They need to know what's likely to be an impact. But recognize that they are living in this culture and they are coping with these pressures and these outside influences because they are trying to navigate those situations while also, retaining status and fitting in with their peers because we all want connection. And we have to remember that for our teens. It's not just as simple as, well, they're just doing the same stupid thing their friends are. They want to connect with others.
Of course they do. I all the time, I don't know if you ever watch like nature shows on Nat Geo and stuff. Okay, so I love it, right? And when I look at teenage boys, they are like lion cubs to me. They're like rambunctious, but they also want to cuddle a little bit, and they want to like stir the pot, and they want to test their limits, and they're so similar to me. And that's actually when I see my kids doing things, I'm thinking, all right, they're just cubs in the wilderness. They're flexing a little bit right now. They're seeing what they can get away with, and they'll be back to normal.
That helps me so much. I do the same exact thing. We watch a lot of nature documentaries, and so it helps me kind of have that detached experience a little bit with the kids. That's
amazing.
You can almost just imagine, Morgan Freeman or somebody narrating what's going on.
Mm-hmm. And he's in his room right now because the hormones are high. Doing kind of his thing, man. That's crazy. What about internet safety and social media
gosh.
What kind of conversations are you having with your kids about that?
This has been a challenging one, and I feel like for us, those of us that have teenagers and young adults right now, they're really the first wave coming up with a lot of this stuff.
100%.
I think the parents of younger kids are going to have more options in terms of keeping their kids safe and monitoring than we did. We're figuring this out on the go. You can have all the conversations and you can talk about, you don't know who's on the other end, and be cautious of what you share. And you think they're listening and you hope they're listening. I use a lot of news stories to kind of talk about things.
Oh, that's a great idea.
If you've been paying attention at all, there's been a ton of stories in the news over the last year for sure about sextortion cases involving young boys. And I can totally see how it happens. It's a lot easier to just bring up and start talking about, hey, did you hear this crazy news story? And share the story about, a boy that you read about who somebody, said they were a teenage girl, and I'll send you pics if you send me pics. And then they were trying to get money, because now you're talking about this. And so I would often piggyback on stories that were going on in the media and then try and use that to impart lessons.
I think that's such a smart way to do it. Use pop culture, use the stuff that they're exposed to anyways. And, one of the things we've said to our kids before is like, go find a great article that tells me you should be on TikTok for 8 hours. If you bring that to my attention, it's a green light for you. But go find that article first and then come back to me. But here's the other thing, right? You either have your kids are one or two people. They're either what I call creators or consumers. And so knowing what I know about social media, it's like, 90% of the content is created by 10% of the audience.
You're right.
That used to be the old stat. And my boys, for example, and I'd love to see where yours land too on this, but my boys, for example, they're not creators. They don't make a lot of content. They don't post a bunch of stuff. They just consume a bunch of stuff. And were yours similar, or were they creators?
I think at least one of mine walks an interesting line where they're all much more consumers, but a fair number of them they consume and then they use in the real world. So for instance, my youngest, he's 17. He's always been very mechanically minded, right? He watched a ton of, and now listens to podcasts too, like, guys building things, fixing things, modding things. He rebuilt a snowmobile engine largely with, things that he learned off of YouTube videos and cool. Instagram posts, and he does dirt bike stuff. And he's a bit of an unusual 17-year-old. He has a lawn care business. And I'm not just talking a push lawnmower. He's got a full commercial grade Skag stand-on lawnmower with the trailer and everything now. And he follows landscaping accounts. And so he learns a lot and then applies it in the real world. My car loving 20-year-old kind of does similar. You
guys need to write a book and inspire their age group.
Right. My 25-year-old, he definitely is a consumer, and I'm not sure that he's putting his music necessarily online, but he's taught himself to play guitar using online resources. So it's sort of that in between. And I think the internet can be very healthy for kids in those ways. Sure. It can be very healthy, it can be very horrible, and it can be everything in between.
Jennifer Fink is with us. Building Boys is her new book. You just put this thing out. Did it take you a long time to come up with the idea to write this book and want to put this book out? And then I think the second question to piggytail on that is, why did you feel like this book needed to come out for us to read?
The book has been the culmination of, 25 years of parenting. Yeah. I started blogging about boys. That was the first blog I had in 2009. Just grew from there. And it was pre-pandemic, couple years pre-pandemic. I was coming home from a writing conference. And, I'd been thinking I'd want to do a book at some point in time. Okay, if I do a book, what would it be about? Blah, blah, blah. And I was on the airplane home, and I ended up jotting down what ended up becoming the 10 chapters of this book, 10 guidelines. At that point in my head, it was going to be titled The New Rules of Raising Boys. Okay. And so that evolved. It turned into an actual book proposal. And pretty much every writer, I thought for sure, I'm going to get a deal on this sooner rather than later. It's not how it went. It took a while.
It takes a
why did I think it was important, and why did I think it's important now? This whole process of raising boys, especially as a woman raising boys, it showed me how much I did not know and how much I did not understand. And, those of us who are moms of boys, we did not get the benefit of growing up as boys. We don't understand the culture at all. We don't understand the pressures at all. And having lived through all of that, and because I am a woman, I feel like I'm pretty well positioned to say, okay, well, here's what you might be thinking, but here's what I've learned, and here's what might be going on. Kind of can translate a little bit in there. Yeah. And I also realized that despite the fact that males still have a lot going for them, especially in this society, you look around and you can still see guys all over the place. top leadership positions.
For sure. For sure.
And there are also a lot of guys who are struggling. And in schools, a lot of boys are struggling. And so that helped me see that, one, what our boys are experiencing are not necessarily what the men are experiencing, or at least some of them. And that there are a lot of people that don't understand things like teenage boys are just kind of figuring it out in the same way the lion cubs are. It doesn't mean they're wrong or terrible or dangerous. They're growing. I wanted to help kind of demystify boys, help people understand their language and what they need, because I really believe that boys need as much support and as much care as girls, as non-binary children. But they don't often get it. We don't always treat our boys with compassion, and that's been missing, I think.
Yeah, that's funny you say that. Chris Rock actually has a comedy bit where he talks about how we treat dogs better than we treat men. Because if we're not providing, if we're not doing this, if we're not doing that, if we're not, and he's like, people treat dogs better than they treat men. And he's not wrong. But the reason that's such a hard conversation to have is because of the thing that you kind of started with, which is, and men still pretty much own all the crap. They're still doing all the things. They're still sitting in most of the leadership positions. They're still running most companies. There are still those truths out there. And so it feels challenging to say and raise your hand and say, can we help boys? Because people feel like, bro, we've been helping boys forever. Like that's why we're not right now. And it's like, you can't just drop them off. We still have to give them some support to help them get to this new party that we're trying to define.
I did have somebody say to me recently, okay, I get it. Like, maybe we don't get boys, but kind of, the guys had the last 10,000 years. So maybe we can let the girls have the next 10,000. I don't think that's a great plan. And I am saying that as a female, because it's a really dangerous thing to neglect the needs of a major portion of the population, right? Yeah. So yes, maybe that is how it went for the last 10,000 years. But if you ignore the needs of boys and men for the next 10,000, things are going to get bad for everybody, because people who do not have their human needs met are not happy, content, satisfied people who interact with others with respect. That's not something that we can afford to do. We can't afford to do that for our safety and well-being, but also think about all of the talent and the ideas that we miss out when we don't nurture part of our population.
Yeah, it's interesting. We as a human race seem to fall into a couple of different categories, but one of the categories that we can fall into is, if it happened to me, then it needs to happen to you. If I experienced it, then you have to experience it. And boy, that's just getting it so wrong, in my opinion, because we need to keep lifting. We just have to acknowledge we weren't doing it the right way for the last 10,000 years. Now we want to start doing it the right way. Right?
Let's take what we've learned and just apply it as universally as we can, instead of saying, well, we're going to selectively apply it over here. I don't think that's the best way to move forward.
So, okay, let's start to kind of wind down a little-ish, but you hit me with a couple of the rules that you've written about in your book that you're really passionate about.
Chapter 2, second rule, discuss and demonstrate healthy relationships.
Okay, let's go.
Healthy relationships. I had this conversation with another mom today, and we all hear a lot of conversation about consent. Consent is important. Everybody listening is going to agree with that, I believe. But so often in the conversation, it's almost framed as, boys, you need to make sure you ask for consent. Okay, yes. And really, we need to be teaching all of our children about what is a healthy relationship. It's not just sex. Sex is certainly part of life, and we have to talk about these things. But ultimately, what we want is for our children to have healthy relationships with one another. So in this book, in this chapter, I take a very holistic point of view. And first of all, you got to start with your own relationships.
That's why I was clapping.
Right? Because if you are not in a healthy relationship, if you don't have healthy relationships with your friends, with other people in your life, how can you possibly expect your children to treat other people with respect?
Jennifer is telling the truth right now, everybody.
And it's hard. It is really hard because it means we have to look at ourselves.
Yes.
Parenting is the hardest but most effective, if you let it be, self-improvement program that I've ever discovered.
I will piggyback on that and say that for about 8 years, I studied under a Buddhist teacher. And when I would ask him about like, hey, what do you think I could work on? Or what do you think I could do? He would say, go learn from your children. Literally every time he would say, go learn from your children. And I would say, I don't really get it. Okay. But I get it now. That's what he was talking about. They teach us so much about ourselves.
Yes. And so when we're talking about relationships, like there's our adult relationships that they see and they're picking up on no matter what we say, they pick on what we're doing.
Yeah.
And then there's how we treat our children and interact with our children. I mean, again, I can't scream at my son, respect me, if I am not also demonstrating respect and showing respect to him and to other people. Relationships include, brothers' relationships with each other's. Your two sons, I am willing to bet, have bickered and fought over the years.
Once, I think.
Yeah, right. Was that before school this morning?
Yeah, today. Once today.
Uh-huh. And he's like, I haven't seen them yet this afternoon.
Right, they're not done with school yet, so there's still time.
Exactly. They are learning relationship skills through their sibling interactions, through their friend interactions. And so we can take this big picture and teach them in all of those circumstances how to have healthier relationships. And we have to acknowledge what we see. I mean, you mentioned the lion cubs. I actually use that example for my boys when they were younger. I remember seeing first graders. It was at church. It was, like my kids were going to a Catholic school at that time.
Okay.
Holy Mass. And I had to be behind the first graders. And they were like a pack of puppies. I mean, the teacher's telling them, keep your hands to yourself, but they can't. They just can't at that point in life.
Yeah.
That's okay. That's normal. That is part of learning healthy relationships at that point.
Yeah. All right. Give me your second favorite chapter. I love discuss and demonstrate. Two critical elements there.
One of my favorite chapters is at the end, and it is accept him. And it is so super important because I think for a long time, especially with boys, shame has kind of been this tool that we have used to try and shape them into who we think they should be. Yeah. What do you think? Does that ring true to you as a former boy?
I just think it's how so many of us were raised. It's how we raise our children. Yeah, and like I said earlier in our conversations, it's like shame is one of the surefire ways to wound your kids. Yeah. And it's the worst, it's like fear sucks, shame sucks, guilt sucks. Like they're just not useful things. They're
not. And yet it almost seems like a integral part of our parenting repertoire. Like we were born with it, but we weren't. We were taught it. It's what was in the air and the culture around us.
Sure it was.
And it's much healthier to learn, and we have to learn to accept and love our children as they are. Our kids are human. They have strengths. They have things that are, it's not your strong point, kid. But we have to acknowledge their gifts, even if they're not what we thought they would be or what we think they should be. Because that is like when you feel truly known and seen by somebody, that's when you feel good about yourself. And when you feel good about yourself, that's when you can open your eyes and more effectively see and recognize the humanity in somebody else.
And you just show up completely differently. That's the thing. You show up completely different. What would you say to a group of people who, I think they're getting a little quieter, but there's still pretty good, good clip of people out there that didn't really buy into all this new foo-foo parenting stuff. And again, I actually think they fall into that category I just mentioned a few minutes ago, which is it happened to them, and they're going to make damn well it happens to their kids and their kids and their kids too. So what kind of advice do you have for somebody who needs to wake up a little bit and realize that like we're kind of done with the old way because we literally know it doesn't work long term.
Right.
You're going to respect me because, there's a little bit of that old school. And don't get me wrong, I like some of the old school stuff. I am. I'm a pay your dues kind of a guy, and I am earn your place. And there is some of that's true, but if you really want to connect with your children, it's probably not going to get you very far long term.
No. For me, when I was working on this book and I was researching it, the most fascinating piece of research I came across, I think it's in, chapter 8, maybe. Keep him close. I learned that back in the 1920s, there was this man, his name was John B. Watson, and he was the president of the American Psychological Association. Like, this is not a fringe person, like bigwig.
Got it.
And he wrote the best-selling parenting book at the time. This is well before Dr. Spock. This was his best-selling parenting book. And it legitimately counseled parents to push their children away. Too much coddling was thought to be damaging to children. He wrote, "It is a serious question in my mind whether there should be individual homes for children or whether children should know their own parents. It was very much to be regimented." And
what?
Listen to this. This man had 2 sons. He and his, he got divorced from his first wife and he ended up marrying his assistant and had 2 sons with them. They raised their children this way.
This is like the Cub way, right? But this is the part of the Cub way I don't want, where they like punt their youth.
It didn't go well. I mean, this is the heartbreaking thing. I'm like, well, how did his kids turn out? One of his sons died as an adult by suicide.
Oh.
And the other one came out later and said, I really believe that this is part of why this happened. And this is why I have struggled with relationships my whole life. To me, that is very, very, very powerful. And it helped me also, like, this was mainstream parenting advice, cutting edge in the 1920s. That's not so many generations ago.
I know, and that's the thing about parenting is that it's such a generational thing. It takes such a strong transitional character, as I like to call them, to stop the flow of all that generational trauma and just garbage that kind of keeps coming along. And you think about it, the 20s, like that's my grandpa and grandma. Right. They were from that generation, okay? And so those are the people that raised my mom, my dad, right?
Okay. So if you want to know, you want to talk about transitional character.
Oh, yes, I do.
All right. Here are the 2 sentences in this book that I am most concerned about my own mother reading, okay? Are you ready?
Got it. Yes.
There may well be a straight line between this style of parenting, characterized by deliberate parental rejection, and my maternal grandfather's eventual death from alcoholism. And from him to my mother's inability to recognize or accept emotions, and my tendency to contort my actions to fit the needs and desires of those around me.
Hello.
I'm not looking forward to that conversation with my mom, I'll be honest. I kept them in there, though, because I think those are some of the most true sentences that I've ever written.
It's the whole game, Jennifer. It's the whole thing right there.
And the next sentence is, if we want our boys to grow into healthy, resilient men who know themselves, who respect the emotions, needs, and boundaries of others, we must accept and love them unconditionally.
I just love what you said for all of the right reasons. And I talk about this when I go out and speak a little bit. It's like you're going to say some things about maybe your mom or your dad or your brother, your sister, or some relationship, ex-husband, wife, whatever. And they're not going to be real flattering. But we're not doing it to like blast them on TMZ. We're doing it because we want to stop a process, stop a thing, and we're ready to try something new. It doesn't mean your mom was the worst, unemotional, ungiving, uncaring, never there for you kind of a mom. It doesn't mean that at all. She, in fact, might have been the polar opposite of that in other cases. Very loving, very understanding, absolutely somebody you could confide in. It just means that you had the other stuff too, and that's got to be okay to say.
We are all affected by what came before us. And
yes.
We are so impacted by those things. And when we can understand that, I think it helps us, I don't know, it helps me let go a little bit.
Yes,
it's
certainly,
not just,
of course.
It's not just me choosing to be this way. I've been influenced by what came before. I'm a product of my culture, what happened to them. Like you, I'm trying to do the best I can in my time. I'm trying to help my kids navigate the world that they're in. And you know what? I am quite sure that I am screwing up some of this. My boys, by the way, they're already joking about the book that they're going to write to go with this. The boys that the book built, and they're going to write their side of it. So I can't wait to read it. I can't wait to see what they want done.
I'm telling you right now, that you got to sell them together, and you guys are going to make a fortune.
Well, it's funny because now they want the book to be a success so that then they can get a good deal. I'm like, okay, help me sell it, gentlemen.
Okay. I mean, let's kind of wrap up with that thought, which is, how are you doing? And this is a scary question for a lot of parents, but it's an important one to ask yourself from time to time. It's like, okay, let's just, in Buddhism, we would say mahumadra, step outside yourself, looking at yourself. So you're like twice removed and you're looking at the situation. You're going, how is this guy doing? And so if Jennifer stepped outside of herself and then she's watching that situation, what kind of a grade is she giving her parenting?
Ooh. I think that I am more compassionate to myself if I step out that far, right?
Yeah.
I really do think I am. Listen, I know that I have things to improve. Everybody does. But do I love my children fiercely? Yes. Do I try to be there for them? Yes. Am I approachable enough that they come to me with things when they need to? Yeah, more or less. Do I try to take care of myself and live my own life while at the same time being there for these growing adults? Yeah, I think I do. So I'm going to give myself an A from going that far back.
Good for you.
Now is when I really hope that my kids don't listen and send you a message on your website. Because they're still young enough that there's no way they are giving me an A. They're just not.
Listen, you can get an A and still bomb a test every now and again. It is possible, right?
Yes. And that's really helpful feedback, right? For all the parents. We are so hard on ourselves.
Sure. And you can literally still get an A and bomb a test. It'll happen. Guaranteed it's going to happen. In fact, you'd be silly to not expect it to happen.
Yep.
Right?
Yep. Absolutely.
Good for you. I loved talking to you. We're going to have you back sometime. I'll learn from people who lived it if you're all right with it.
I'd love it.
Yeah,
how are
Jennifer
you doing
Fink.
when you pull back that far? I got to know.
I think I'm right at about a solid B plus, A minus, if we're going to go in that. And I'm doing better and better. And any inadequate, okay, so here, let's pull the curtain back. So any downgrade in that situation right now would be this vulnerable feeling that I'm having as a male, which is 2 years ago, I made the decision to walk away from my career. And I was successful at my career, and we made a nice living, and we had all the crap that everybody says you're supposed to have to be happy, but none of that stuff really made me happy. And now I've stepped into a career path where, like I did when I was 19 and building my radio career, I'm building a new business and a new career. And as a result, I have put my family in a situation where, things aren't as cozy as they used to be. And while I believe that a healthy dose of that is good for them, it doesn't mean that it hasn't been hard on them. And so from that perspective, I am a little insecure at the moment.
And you want to talk about things that trigger, right? I mean, what message did you hear about being a man? Probably all growing up. Provide. Yeah, certainly. And so, I wrestle with a little bit of that. But on the flip side of that coin, like I've taught my children that you can walk away, you can blow up something that you've built. You can absolutely, at any age, decide that you're ready to take the bull by the horns and get things straightened out. You can follow your dreams and your passion, and it doesn't matter what age you are, what kind of family setup and situation that you have. And so I'm doing let's put it like this, probably like you, Jennifer, I'm getting a lot more right these days than I am wrong. At least that's the way it feels. Mm-hmm. I like that. And I appreciate that vulnerability too. It's so important to share.
Oh, man. Building boys, raising great guys in a world that misunderstands males. Jennifer L. W. Fink, thank you so very much for being our guest today.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.
We have 3 goals with Learn from People Who Lived It. 1. To help you feel less alone. 2. Encourage you to seek out a coach, a therapist, a church, anyone who can help you get through your journey and find some healing. 3. When you're ready, share your story with us.
Find Learn from People Who Lived It, wherever you get podcasts. Search it using all one word. Learn from People Who Lived It.